Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. What's a moment where you thought, I'm dead, but you survived? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. There was one time when I was hiking in a remote area with some friends, and we decided to take a shortcut that wasn't on the map. As we were climbing a steep rocky section, I lost my footing and slipped for a brief moment. I was free-falling and thought this is it. Miraculously, I landed on a narrow ledge a few feet below, bruised and shaken but alive. It was a terrifying experience, but it made me realize the importance of caution and respecting nature. Middle of winter on the highway going 76 mph. Totally clear and sunny. Hit a shadow going over an overpass, and my car decided spinning in a circle while going straight was the way to go. There were semis and trucks everywhere, and the whole time I'm thinking, this is going to suck really bad. After the third rotation, my rear end just grabs the road, and I'm instantly on my way again. I slowed down, and the guy next to me rolled down his window and yelled, "That was the gnarliest thing I ever saw." I watched a semi-truck carrying a nuclear ICBM warhead slide off the road and into a ditch hard, right underneath my guard tower. Of course, in retrospect, I was not in any danger at all, but it's hard to watch a nuclear warhead be involved in a crash and not swallow your chair from the pucker factor. I was at the Bartender Expo in Islamorada, Florida. Basically a drunken fest for 3 days every May. There's a sandbar about a mile or two out where people with boats go to drink, and all kinds of debauchery happen. I grabbed a ride out to the sandbar and got annihilated. I fell off the boat and somehow cut my fingers. I walked around trying to get a ride back, but nobody would take me. So I made the genius decision to swim back to shore. Yeah, not a smart idea. I swam about halfway back and was exhausted. I couldn't move my arms and started swallowing water. I felt like, OMG, I'm going to die, and decided to rest by floating. I was nervous and out of breath, but resting while floating on my back, hoping I wouldn't float further away from shore. When suddenly I got yanked out of the water. I didn't even hear the boat. It was the Coast Guard. Grabbed both my arms and yanked me out of the water. So now I'm on a boat. My hand is bleeding everywhere, and this guy is losing his shit all over me. I apologized and told him I thought I could make it, but just ran out of energy. But then I figured out why he was really screaming at me. It wasn't because I almost drowned. As he bandaged my hand, he explained to me that May is bull shark breeding season in Florida. He told me two things sharks love more than anything are blood and shiny objects, and I was lying there with a bleeding hand and a silver chain around my neck you could see from Miami. He told me if I was in a helicopter and could see how many bull sharks were swimming around me, I wouldn't have dipped a toe in the water, but because I was floating on my back, I didn't notice them. This guy basically saved me from one of my worst nightmares, being eaten by sharks. Bull sharks attack people more than any other shark, too. Crossing the road while the Green Man was showing, all I remember was looking down at the road and seeing a car bumper beside my leg and thinking, the moment is frozen in my head. Some asshole had decided to run a red light and to do it at 50-ish miles per hour, estimated speed from my injuries. The next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital when suddenly all the sound effects of the crash seemed to replay in my head, but with no actual visual memories. I heard the thump of my body hit the bonnet, the back of my head cracked the windshield, the crunch of my body hitting the tarmac, and then the screech of the tires as the bastard sped away. Cracked skull, fractured ribs, cracked collarbone, and some sprains on my wrist where I guess I tried to break my fall. Also, I was black and blue all over my body. Strangely, my legs were not that badly injured. Doctors think it was because I went up and over rather than under. Had it been under, I would likely be dead. I was driving in the winter and hit a couple patches of black ice. No alcohol, no traffic, no distractions, just a patch of black ice. Then I almost had it under control, then another patch of black ice. My car spun around a few times, hit a snowbank, flipped over, and kept spinning. I looked at the ice and snow crushing my windshield and thought I was going to die in that moment.
Somehow I came out almost completely unscathed. I took the keys out of the ignition and crawled out of the window. I cut my hands a little from the broken glass, but otherwise I was okay. If I had had a passenger with me, they would have been crushed from where the car landed after flipping over. Physically I was fine, but mentally I had kind of a freak out there alone in a starry wintry night. A car full of chill Canadian dudes let me use their cell phone to call for help. Bummer about your car, eh? A wrecker and some state police came to help me out. I was more calmed down warming up in the police car, but then melted down again when they flipped the car back over, and I realized I was in it when it flipped the first time, except I was at speed and spinning. A couple weeks later, I saw Castaway in the theater and had a minor PTSD flashback during the plane crash scene. Good times. I got a really intense electric shock when I was living alone. No one had a spare key to my place. No one would have started to worry for at least 3 days of the earth for a bit. I talked to the hospital, and they were like, well, you should be fine, but if you stop breathing in your sleep, you need to call emergency services. And I was like, but I live alone. And they were like, well, can someone come over? And after going back and forth for a bit, they were like, well, I mean, you'll probably be fine. When I went to bed, I wrote my best friend's number on my arm in permanent marker. I was very surprised when I woke up the next morning. My wife and I went to a bar to drink and dance with a couple of her friends. Every time I went to the bar to get another round, there would be a lone drinker with a dozen open beer bottles in front of him, and he would offer me one. I declined each time because I don't trust open bottles for obvious reasons, so this happened for another 3 or 4 more times when my group and I needed more drinks. My wife and friends were getting tired, so I returned to the bar to close our tab. While waiting for my check, I noticed the guy wasn't there anymore. I honestly did not think anything of it. So we walked into the parking lot toward our vehicles and heard someone screaming, "Hey you!" My wife asked, "Who's that?" And I responded, "It's just some guy from the bar that kept offering me drinks." He then exited his vehicle and started walking towards me. At this moment, my alarms were going off because I noticed he had one hand behind his back. So I grabbed my wife's arm and pulled her behind me. He then exposed his gun and pointed it right between my eyes. It seemed like the longest 10 seconds of my life because it took every bone, muscle, and nerve in my body not to fight him off. I knew if I made a move, there's a good chance either my friends or my wife will get seriously injured or worse. So during that time, I was super pissed, but remained content and locked eyes with him. I even remembered telling myself that I was ready to die. Shortly after that, he lowered his gun and bolted to his vehicle. I chased him down and managed to get his license plate to file a report. My wife called the cops. We made a report and haven't heard anything since. It took my wife a couple of years to go back to a bar after that incident, but now I'm more vigilant and observant of my surroundings wherever we go.
You know, that was a bad situation and it seemed like it was getting worse, and then a random stranger does a good thing. We need to see more of that, so good.
I have a story for this. Last year, I, female, was visiting India with my mom. My mom is from a city about 6 hours away from Delhi, and I had to fly back earlier than her due to work commitments. Given how hazardous driving can be in India, I opted to take a coach bus for the journey from my mom's city to Delhi. These buses are considered safe, particularly the ones designated for foreigners. My plan was to arrive in Delhi about 8 to 10 hours before my flight, around 6 p.m., and meet my cousin to hang out. Getting directions in India can be quite tricky. It's often based on landmarks rather than precise addresses, which can also be inaccurate. The bus ended up dropping the passengers off at a different location than what was indicated on the website. We were left at a bus stop beneath an underpass. I called my cousin to ask where he was, and he said he was at the bus stop, but there were no buses around. After sharing our location, we realized he was about 30 minutes away. My heart sank. Here I was, a woman, alone, with 2 large suitcases, a carry-on, and a backpack, standing in an underpass as the sun began to set. In Delhi, it's unsafe for women to be alone after dark, and I know I was in a potentially very dangerous situation. Google the rate of SA and R in Delhi alone. It will chill your bones. My cousin told me not to panic, but I could hear the worry in his voice. I tried to remain calm. I hung up with him to conserve my battery, as my phone was already at like 10 to 14%. While I stood there, a group of men began approaching and trying to engage me in conversation. My gut was telling me to find safety ASAP. I tried to stay composed and appear confident, but deep down, I was shaking and shitting bricks. I then decided to call an Uber to take me to my cousin's house, but none of the drivers were accepting my ride. I assumed it might be due to my foreign credit card, and that made me feel even more helpless. At this point, there were about 15 men surrounding me, getting closer and continuing to try and talk to me. I started to feel desperate and was ready to abandon my luggage and find a safer spot. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a young woman standing alone in the distance. I quickly dragged one of my suitcases toward her and asked if I could stand with her. She kindly agreed and helped me bring my things closer. The group of men continued to grow larger and were still eyeing us. I struck up a conversation with her, trying to calm my nerves. It turned out she was visiting her aunt in Delhi, and her Uber would arrive in 5 minutes. Doing the quick math in my head, I realized that I would still have to stand alone in the dark for another 15 minutes. I explained my situation to her and asked if I could come with her to her aunt's house, where my cousin could pick me up. She graciously agreed. I called my cousin to let him know the change of plans. I can't help but feel this woman's kindness saved me. Given the high rates of assault in Delhi, I don't even want to imagine what could have happened if she hadn't stepped in to help me. Several years ago, I went out on a deep-sea diving expedition to a coral reef in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. During my descent about 20 feet down, a current hit me and swept me off the descent line. I tried swimming back, realized I couldn't reach the line, and surfaced. Inflated my BCD, got out my emergency beacon, and then waited, and continued to wait. I watched as the boat got smaller and smaller as the current took me away. Eventually, I couldn't see the boat at all. I came to terms with the fact that I might not be found, and I was at every level of the ocean. After about an hour, a rescue boat came zooming into view. They pulled me in and explained why they didn't get me right away and had to search after I was swept away. At the same time that I fell off the line, another diver panicked and surfaced in a dangerous way. She was flailing around drowning. The crew of the boat saw her freaking out and saw me being calm and following procedure, decided to get her out first. Well, when they tried to get her, she started kicking and fighting them. She fought getting in the rescue boat. She fought them on the boat. She fought them trying to get her back in her bunk. She was completely losing her shit. After they got her under control, they started to search for me. I was nowhere in sight, but they circled out until they found my beacon. I never went diving again. When I was 14 or 15, I was climbing a tree in our front yard. The tree had recently had some branches trimmed, and about 10 feet off the ground was a stump about 5 to 6 inches wide and sticking out from the trunk about 3 feet at an upward angle. So I'm climbing this tree. I'm a ways past the branch stump when the branch in my hand snaps under my weight. I plummet for about 2 seconds, my hand scrambling before I touch a branch. Somehow I managed to snatch onto the branch and cling for dear life. My feet were still touching the tree, and the branch I'm hanging onto is bowed under my weight, so I'm basically standing against the tree trunk at a 90-degree angle. I take a moment to catch my breath, then turn around to see how far off the ground I was. That's when I see the branch stump just underneath me, with the tippy top directly in the middle of my back, maybe 4 inches from my spine. To this day, I'm convinced that I caught myself just in time from hitting that branch square in the spine and paralyzing or killing me.